please welcome David Hatcher Childress.
Thanks, Larry. All right. Well, it's great to be here at the UFO Congress. I'm having a great time, and it's fascinating to see all you. I want to tell you just a little bit about myself really quick, and then we'll get going. I was born in France, but my parents are Americans. I grew up in the mountains of Colorado and Montana. Grew up on a heavy dose of Johnny Quest cartoons and UFO books and cryptozoology and Ripley's Believe It or Not. And just like all of you, I've always been interested in the paranormal, the unexplained, Atlantis, UFOs, aliens, underwater structures, megalithic remains, all kinds of adventures around the world. I love to travel. I'm fascinated by history. One of my keen interests is megalithic building and ancient technology and how they built it. So right now we'll go into technology and megalith building, and then we'll get into vimanas and Nikola Tesla and a few other interesting things at the end. So let's dim the lights and fasten your seatbelts and let's get going. The whole idea of ancient civilizations and how old we are, Atlantis, Lemuria, has always interested me, and I go around the world and I look at the mainstream. For a long time, mainstream archaeologists were saying that the oldest megalithic structures in the world were on the island of Malta, and that they were 7,000 or 8,000 years old, including these ruins on the island of Gozo, Gigantia. And in fact, the whole Mediterranean was apparently hit by a giant tidal wave at some time, and there were pygmy elephants and hippopotamuses on the island of Malta, and they were all washed into this cave in a cataclysm that occurred many thousands of years ago. But today, mainstream scientists and archaeologists are saying that the oldest ruins in the world are those at Göbekli Tepe in today's Turkey. They are megalithic. They're these T-shaped monoliths. They're up to 11,000 years old, mainstream scientists are saying today, putting them at around 9,000 to 10,000 BC. This is about the time of Atlantis. And you'll look here, you'll see that on these T-shaped megaliths, animals have been created in relief. They've got foxes and birds. And today, this is a pretty famous and new discovery. It's shaking foundations of archaeology. This is what it looked like. Göbekli Tepe is on top of a mountain, and it was actually purposely buried by the builders at some time so that we would find it later, possibly to keep it from being destroyed. This is the area where it is. It's really an area of the Middle East, right near the Syrian border, in fact, in central Turkey, near to the Kurdistan and Kurdish areas. When it comes to megalithic building around the world and megalithic blocks, the largest known megalithic blocks in the world are at Baalbek in Lebanon, which is also right near the Syrian border. This is an area that's difficult to go to today. At the Temple of Baalbek are the largest known hewn quarried stones. They weigh up to 1,000 tons. They're huge. They're so huge that they're the size of railway cars cut out of granite. There is a Roman temple on top of Baalbek, and however, the giant stones beneath must be many, many thousands of years old. And those megaliths are so huge, so gigantic, at 1,000 tons, that even modern cranes can't really lift blocks of stone this heavy. And you have to wonder why ancient people are going to work with such huge blocks of stone. We wouldn't do that today with all of our modern technology, cranes and heavy lifting equipment. This would be something we wouldn't even try it. But yet ancient people, possibly extraterrestrials, they were doing this. Why? And how did they do it? Did they have some kind of form of levitation? And this is what we're going to be going into more right now, is that they have power tools, they have some ability to levitate these gigantic stones, put them into place. Mainstream archaeologists have got to explain these things, and they try to. The way they explain Baalbek is that this giant cage was built around these 1,000-ton rectangular blocks of granite, and then with hourglass-type wedges and keyhole cuts are cut into the block, pulleys are used, and then with this giant cage around the 1,000-ton block, they're going to actually move this block of stone a few inches and then start all over again. So this is it. What mainstream archaeologists are saying that what these people are doing, trying to do, is just so incredibly difficult, and yet we have to explain it. But why would they even try to build in such a way? We're now at the Osirion, which is in southern Egypt at Abydos. And in fact, the Osirion is one of the pre-Egyptian type of ruins that we find in Egypt. And you'll notice here how there's notching on some of these stones. You see these unusual knobs and things that are on the blocks. Archaeologists can't really explain it, but the way it's put together is an unusual fashion. It's a way of interlocking megalithic blocks together. And in fact, the Osirion is actually down inside of a swamp that was, the Egyptian government spent decades pumping the water out just to try to actually see the megalithic structure that's there. Something possibly that is over 10,000 years old. Now we're in Cuzco, high in the Andes, the ancient capital of the Incas. This is the famous 12-sided stone block, which actually appears on the local beer that they make there. So also you have this notching, and you have these small knobs and things like that. What we also see at the Osirion in Egypt, all megalithic buildings. You see in Cuzco different forms of megalithic structures in a jigsaw pattern, a way of locking blocks together. They're perfectly fitted. Now this structure here, which is very similar to the structures at Cuzco, is actually the Necromanticon structure. And it's also underground. It's in northern Greece, near the Albanian border. And it too has this jigsaw pattern of megalithic blocks fitted together and perfectly fitted in a curious way, identical to much of the stonework that you find in Peru. When you go right outside of Cuzco, up the hill, you come to the megalithic fortress of Sacsayhuaman. Sacsayhuaman here's an aerial shot of it. It's like a giant field and a fortress. The Incas and the Spanish did have a battle there. There were 3 towers that were there at Sacsayhuaman. You have also blocks of stone, in this case limestone. There is some granite there that's weighing 100 tons, 200 tons, but not quite the 1,000 tons that we see at Baalbek. Here again, you have this jigsaw pattern of stones, and in many ways, this is the most sophisticated method of megalithic fitting together of stones, because the stones are cut and fitted as a jigsaw pattern without any mortar, perfectly fitted so that even a razor blade or a piece of paper can't be inserted between these stones. But when the shock waves of big earthquakes hit these walls, they move, but they're interlocked together. And so these walls have survived probably many thousands of years of earthquakes, and they still hold together. It's really incredibly impressive when you're there at Sacsayhuaman. there's a big open field there too that you have to think of as possibly a vimana port, and we'll talk about that again. As you look around Sacsayhuaman-2, you see these areas where there are upside down staircases, things that are been cut by looking like power saws and other tools, but it doesn't make any sense. You can't see why anyone would even do this kind of stonework and cutting. It's as if that it was all destroyed, turned over in some cataclysm of some sort, and yet excellent stonemasons, people apparently with power tools, are going in there, cutting little shelves and notches and doing this articulation of the stone, and yet for no real reason. All around Sacsayhuaman-2 is an underground tunnel system like this. Some of it's cut into solid rock. The Peruvian government actually spent some time trying to explore this. Some of these tunnels supposedly go to the Temple of the Sun, which is in the center of Cuzco. The Peruvian government has sealed off some of these tunnel entrances to keep people from going down inside and getting lost. There's stories of lost treasure, and even the tunnels go for miles and miles through the Andes. This is how that it's explained of the building where people, primitive people, supposedly in Peru, the Incas, who are alleged to have built some of these structures, they didn't have the wheel or writing, and yet they would apparently do all of this amazing construction, and only a few hundred years before the Spanish, supposedly. This is the city of Machu Picchu. It's also a megalithic city. It's a secret city on top of a mountain, and the Spanish never knew about this city. It also has the giant interlocked blocks of stone. It has the notching. It has the oddball knobs that archaeologists cannot figure out what they're for. Perfectly fitted in many cases. It's today, Machu Picchu is the most popular tourist site in all of South America. It's a spectacular city, and it's a place that I wish everyone could go and see. You see large lichen patches building here, huge structures there. Near to Machu Picchu, in the Sacred Valley, along the Urubamba River, is this site too, called Ollantaytambo. And Ollantaytambo has some of the most unusual megaliths in South America. As you walk up the stairs to Ollantaytambo, you then come to this giant wall. And once again, we're looking at these oddball knobs and things that are coming out of the wall. It's thought that they had something to do with the building of the walls, but they don't really know what. And this is like the Osirion in ancient Egypt. Also, we see large lichen patches and things. You come along this wall, it's finely articulated granite. And here you can see again how perfectly fitted and cut that it is, the way they've been doing it. It's the kind of stone masonry and construction that we can't really duplicate today. But as you get up to the top of Ollantaytambo and the Sun Temple there, you then start to see some really unusual things. There is a giant wall, but you see huge megaliths like this. Megaliths they're just lying around, giant blocks of stone. And you see here things like this, the notching of these megaliths here. And it's clear that other giant stones are to be put in here, but they're missing. You have one wall, this one here. They call it the wall of the 6 megaliths. It has the vague imprint of what's called an Andean cross over here. And then it also has these very narrow strips of granite that's along the sides here. It's a very unusual type of construction. Basically, when you go to Ollantaytambo, you stand in front of this wall that's just sort of sitting there, and you take some photos. But this is the thing that's unusual here, is that you're looking at, say, a 200-ton block of granite here, and it's notched over here, and it has this notch, but then you have this crummy filling between it. Now, mainstream archaeologists are saying, oh yeah, the Incas just dragged this 200-ton block of granite up here, and then, yeah, they just filled it in with this scrummy construction there. That's how they did stuff, you know, the Incas. And so it's actually quite clear when you see it, and I think most tourists, when they go there, although they're telling you, oh, the Incas just built all this, 200 years before the Spanish got there. But what's totally clear is that you're looking at two different phases of construction. One that's incredibly ancient. It must have been done thousands of years ago. And then you have this crummy construction here, and it's the Inca construction. This is what the Incas are doing, because they're not able, just like we aren't, of putting in the other gigantic megalithic blocks and perfectly fitting them in to be notched. And so this is what you're seeing. You're also seeing these giant blocks of stone just lying around. This is how it was in Inca times too, just as we see it today. And modern Peruvian archaeologists, they're unable to move these stones or move them anywhere. They just leave them where they are and make sure that, you know, tourists don't climb all over them. So here you go too. You see how that they're notched. They have this articulation here. Other giant stones are going to be fitted perfectly with these stones, and that's certainly the intention. And yet, some of it was never completed. It's like some cataclysmic change happened here at Ollantaytambo, scattering giant 200-ton blocks around to be lying there today. And something else that you see at Ollantaytambo, which is so unusual, are what are called keystone cuts that you see here on the sides. Now, these keystone cuts are typically a T-shaped cut into very hard red granite in this case. And there's got to be another stone on the other side, and it's going to have a corresponding T-shaped cut like this. These are called keystone cuts, and then metal clamps or cramps are poured into these cuts, and they form a double T shape. And it's an unusual way of fitting these gigantic blocks together. And you wouldn't think these blocks are going anywhere anyway, but yet these people are trying to do this. And we're going to see more of these around the world, and they are, in my mind, one of the keys to figuring out who are these builders. Who are they? Where were they from? And where did they do their building? And we'll be astonished to see what kind of building they did. Because molten metals are poured into these keystone cuts, they have to be horizontal. They can't be on a vertical face, because liquid metals have got to be poured inside it. But yet, at Ollantaytambo, you're going to see places where these keystone cuts are actually on blocks that are vertical. And so this is not where these blocks were meant to be. You can't use a keystone cut like this. And then once again, we see a giant megalithic block with this crummy rock cut filling. And mainstream archaeologists just don't get this. They're thinking that, yeah, this is the Incas building stuff. You know, some crummy stone filling here, a giant 200-ton granite block there. As you go up to the quarry, there is a gigantic quarry that's across the river, across the Urubamba River. This is flowing down into the Amazon jungle. And as you go up the quarry, you see this in the fields, which is like actually kind of a mirage image of a pyramid that's done in the fields there. And the people at Ollantaytambo call this the pyramid, but it's just like sort of a painting done with the fields and things. As you get up to the quarry, which is high up on a mountain across the river, you suddenly start to see this giant blocks and boulders of granite that have come down from the mountain up here. It's like somebody blasted this granite cliff face until all of these blocks came down. And then giant blocks are sitting there, and whoever was doing this was using giant saws to just square this granite. Here is one block at the quarry, another 100-ton, 200-ton block of granite. And you can see here, like the saw marks that are on it, but they stopped sawing it. Some kind of gigantically huge saw was just sawing these blocks of granite like a loaf of bread. One of the strange things that's also up there is this stone wheel, like straight out of the Flintstones or something. And it's perfectly cut. It's what exactly they were going to do with this and why. There is a granite wheel like this at Tiwanaku too. They've left this at the quarry. We have no idea what this is for, why it was there. Did it have something to do with the moving of these giant blocks of stone? And supposedly, get this, the Incas didn't know about the wheel. Yet they're making these gigantic granite wheels at the quarry. All right, we'll go back now to Cuzco briefly, to the Coricancha, the sun temple there. There was supposedly a tunnel system that went from this sun temple, and the Incas did use it, just like Spanish people are using and living in these buildings in Cuzco today. The Incas lived there too. I mean, these buildings are indestructible. When they built buildings like this, they meant them to last for thousands of years. And the Incas wallpapered the inside of these buildings with gold leaf and things like that. And one of the things that you see there is this very strange door, which has all of this odd articulation. Drill holes are drilled through the hard granite. It's like some kind of machine or device was somehow installed in this wall, and it would fit in there. Even you might have had cables, like copper cables coming out of it on each side. It has all this articulation. It's like some really complicated machine of metal or something was there. Perhaps some kind of power generator, even a Stargate kind of a thing. We don't know what it was. And you can see by the way that it's built, it's very finely made and articulated. It's baffling. Mainstream archaeologists are saying that this is something that the Incas were using this to hang a tapestry and have a statue or something like that in. As we move south in Peru, we come to a place called Cotimbo. And Cotimbo is a very oddball spot of towers on top of a mesa. And as you hike up there, you come to some places in the cliff where somebody has also cut and smoothed off parts of the rock and polished it for no real reason. I mean, we can't really figure out why they would even do this. But it's clearly been cut. It's like somebody was using power tools and polishing the rock. And then when you get up to the top of Cotimbo, you have these strange buildings. This big megalithic square building. There are a bunch of towers up there. They're also megalithic. They have a jigsaw type pattern. There are serpents carved into relief there on many of the towers. Also animals like mountain lions and what they call pumas in South America. And this is like Göbekli Tepe. The same kind of a thing at the megaliths at Göbekli Tepe in Turkey are these animals cut into relief onto these megaliths. And they're saying that Göbekli Tepe now is maybe 11,000 years old. But they're saying that the towers at Cotimbo, which apparently maybe were built by the same people, that they're only 1,000 years old or even less. You have these serpents cut into other stones that are in areas of Cuzco. And serpents are the most common thing that are cut. And they're cut in relief in the sense that when they cut the stone, they had to cut all the other stone around it to have these animals or snakes be there. And it's an interesting thing that in northern Iraq and Kurdistan, with the ancient Yazdi religion, which they think is one of the oldest religions in the world, it goes back to ancient Sumeria, that they also had these serpents cut into their walls of their ancient temples in Mosul and other areas of very extreme parts of Kurdistan in northern Iraq. So it's very similar to what we see in Peru and at Cuzco and Kutimbo and Silistani places. As you keep moving south along the western shore of Lake Titicaca, you come to this spot. This is what they call the Stargate, or the Devil's Door, or the Door of Amaru Muru. It's about 20 feet high. It's just cut into this solid rock. This is about 6 feet high or so here. It's as if other structures and walls had been fitted into this wall at one time or another, but yet it's all gone. You can actually see this from the road. It's like a false door, but people claim they have mystical experiences and stuff there, that it's some kind of interdimensional doorway. You have this in Egypt too. This is at Giza. The Egyptians would cut what they call false doors into walls and things like that. So you have that kind of correlation. You are now, at this point, at Lake Titicaca. And Lake Titicaca is the highest navigable lake in the world. It's nearly at 13,000 feet in the Andes. It's quite deep in many places. There are underwater structures in Lake Titicaca. And Lake Titicaca is known for a lot of UFO activity. It's a popular place for people to go and watch for UFOs. UFOs are said to come out of the lake, as if there's some kind of underwater UFO base here at Lake Titicaca. There's a strange thing about Lake Titicaca too. It has a type of seahorse that lives in the lake. And yet seahorses are oceanic animal and live, normally a place to see seahorses would be Indonesia or some tropical area like that. But a kind of a seahorse is there at Lake Titicaca, and they can't really explain that. It was almost as if Lake Titicaca had been connected at some point to the ocean, yet today it's nearly 13,000 feet in the Andes. People like James Churchward, who was a British colonel who later settled in the United States. He wrote the book, The Lost Continent of Mu. He believed that at one point, before some cataclysmic pole shift that had sunk Atlantis and Mu and whatnot, that South America was depressed, that it was down at nearly sea level, that the Amazon was a seabed, and that there was an ancient canal somehow connecting through Lake Titicaca, and that somehow that's how seahorses got there. So that was his theories on how the ocean had been there. Just to the south shore area of Lake Titicaca is Tiwanaku. This is the famous Sun Gate at Tiwanaku. He's crying. He's supposedly Viracocha. There are tears coming down his eyes. And some people say they're the tears of the sun. And the idea that there was a metallurgical station here, people were mining gold and other metals. This would be the whole idea of Anunnaki mining and things like that. You have these statues, the guys are wearing turbans. They all have tears coming down from their eyes, which may be the molten metals that they were using there. And at Tiwanaku, too, there's an unusual thing where you have these strange tunnels going through the complex. Bolivian archaeologists are only now digging into areas of Tiwanaku and uncovering this. And in fact, at the time, they weren't allowing any photos of this area for some reason. But it's as if Tiwanaku was some giant hydrological plant with water pouring through it. There was a lake up at the top, and they forced water throughout the city. And water was flowing everywhere. There were artificial canals. And what they may have been doing was washing ores, because it was a gigantic megalithic metal processing plant. They have to wash ores. Then they have the liquid metals that they're pouring into the clamps. They've got gold, copper, bronze, tin. This is the famous Kontiki statue, who's also there. He's holding his hands in a special way of one hand over his heart and his stomach. This is the famous tiki pose. And when you go to Tahiti and New Zealand and areas, you'll get tiki medallions that they're doing exactly this. He has a thick mustache and a beard. American Indians don't actually have facial hair. They can't grow beards and mustaches, not like this. And so this would be the idea that this guy is some foreigner, possibly from the Middle East or something, maybe one of the Anunnaki. The famous archaeologist Thor Heyerdahl used that Kontiki as the name of some of his books, and he built these rafts. You can see here what they did was they had a reservoir on top of this pyramid so that they had to use ram pumps, some kind of way to get water to flow uphill into this reservoir, which they then used to force water throughout the city. This is the area that we're talking about of and Lake Tiwanaku is just south of Lake Titicaca. This is a satellite photo of Lake Titicaca, and it's this area down in this lower part is called the smaller lake. And in fact, it's said by people in the area that this area of the lake, and part of it's in Peru, some of it's in Bolivia, that there is a sunken city here, and it's also this area where it is said that a lot of UFO activity occurs, right in here, and that UFOs are coming out. And actually all over Lake Titicaca, there are stories of lights underwater, at night UFOs come out. This was a Bolivian artist named Ramiro Gonzalez. He also had this whole idea of Tiwanaku and Puma Punku as being part of a vast canal system that was connected to the ocean and Lake Titicaca. Boats and things would come in, they would dock, almost like a Venice, but a Venice that was in the high Andes. They're building with gigantic blocks of stone. Gonzalez believed too in this whole idea of the pole shifts. He thought of South America as this narrow sliver of the Andes with the ocean on either side. So he had some interesting ideas, which I was fascinated by, although I'm not so sure he had the right answers. These are the gigantic blocks at Puma Punku. Now, Puma Punku is one of the most unusual areas. It's built out of sandstone and granite, and you have the keystone cuts, like we were looking at Ollantaytambo. Now we know that Puma Punku and Tiwanaku are much older than the Incas. So here we have what is admittedly pre-Inca building, but it's the same style as what's often attributed to the Incas. You have 200-ton, 300-ton giant blocks of sandstone and granite, just huge piles of these things. They're thrown around like some kids' building blocks in some huge cataclysm that completely wiped out this area. There's a tremendous amount of very fine stonework. They're kind of articulating and cutting. You have, again, this keystone cuts for huge clamps. What would be pouring in very, very large bronze clamps here to try and hold these giant blocks together. And yet you have to think, like, why did they even need this kind of a thing? When you have these huge blocks of stone, you wouldn't think that they're going anywhere. Here we are with the Ancient Aliens crew with my friend Brian Forrester and myself, and we're examining what they call the H blocks. And these H blocks are almost like some kind of prefabricated Lego blocks. And they're so perfectly cut and articulated, and the edges, they have to be made with power tools and precision power tools, even using some kind of computer aided design to put these things together. Huge keystone cuts again. As you look around many of the blocks, you're seeing the keystone cuts. They're all over the place, particularly at Puma Punku. Here too is another stone at Puma Punku that's been sawn, cut by a very fine saw, and then drilled with these small little holes. And this is my friend Chris Dunn, a British engineer I travel around the world with sometimes. And he's the kind of guy who also really gets out his special calibers. Here's Chris here examining blocks and these drill holes. And he's really an expert, and he runs an aircraft machine shop, actually, in Danville, Illinois. And he knows machining and working with things, working with power tools, how people can do this, and what can be done with just bashing a stone out with a rock in your hand. And that's what mainstream archaeologists are saying was done. I mean, these people didn't have power tools, supposedly. They didn't even have iron wedges or hammers or anything. They're using a rock in their hand to bash these things out. That's what mainstream archaeologists are saying. And yet, you can't build things like that. I mean, even today, we would need precision tools, power tools to do that. What you see here, too, at Puma Punku, the whole place has been just totally destroyed, and you have the keystone cuts here, blocks. This is a typical trenching that archaeologists do. And some of the blocks are just sitting there on top of 3 or 4 feet of mud and muck from some cataclysm that just washed over Puma Punku and destroyed it and then left it just sitting there and buried under tons and tons of mud from some cataclysmic tidal wave or something that hit it. And quite possibly from Lake Titicaca, of course. Huge stone statues have been found at Tiwanaku and Puma Punku. This is called the Bennett monolith. Many of the statues there too they're weighing 100 tons or something, and they're wearing turbans. They have these bug eyes. They look very strange. They also often have fish scale pants and things. They're sort of like fishmen or something like that, the way they're dressed. This was a strange thing too at Tiwanaku, where some of the stones have been patched with a kind of a weird cement. And that's one of the stories too, that somehow they liquefy the stone and are able to melt it and work with it. And some areas are actually patched with some kind of liquid stone. This kind of a stone too, which is also at Tiwanaku, where you have this radius and it's cut. And the thing to look for is just how perfect the radius is. This too, and to get these kind of inside angles and things, this is the kind of stone, particularly that you're looking for, that shows evidence of being machined, and that some huge lathes and power tools are cutting this thing, and they do it completely perfectly. There too, you have these monolithic doors that are just one solid piece of granite, and yet they're a door. I mean, how you would build like this? They have drill holes here. How you're going to drill into granite like that? Well, we have also monolithic doors in Iran, at Persepolis. They're also built out of completely solid stone, and in many ways they're identical to the kind of doors that you see at Puma Punku and also at Tiwanaku. So this is a diagram of what these monolithic doors look like. I mean, whoever's making these, they're cutting them and articulating them in such a way that would only be possible with power tools. And why they would be doing it is, and cutting all these fancy designs even into the doors. Whatever they're doing, it's easy for them, including the lifting and the moving of these giant 100-ton blocks and things like that. This is what a block looks like with a keystone clamp in it. They're typically bronze. They're poured into place. So now we'll go briefly back to Egypt. We're at Karnak Temple, and we're looking at keystone cuts here. This is Egypt right here. This is an unusual way of fitting megalithic blocks together. But we're seeing it in Egypt, and we're seeing it in Peru and Bolivia as well. This is a block, too, at the Edfu Temple in southern Egypt, and it's also got all these keystone cuts in it, but they're on a vertical wall. And so all of these blocks that we're seeing are not meant to be here. Whoever is building this, I mean, this is a wall that's been reconstructed from other blocks of stone. And even though you see a few keystone cuts that are sort of fitted together, most are just by themselves. You can't have them on a vertical wall because liquid molten metal has to be poured into these things. So this, too, is a reconstructed wall, and the ancient Egyptians reconstructed themselves. Now we're going to go to My Son, a place in central Vietnam, near Da Nang, right near the former border between North and South Vietnam. In fact, a lot of the fighting during the Vietnam War was in this area. It's a megalithic city, too, built by supposedly the Cam people. And here you see, again, the same keystone cuts that you see in Egypt, in Peru, in Bolivia. And when I was at Mison, I pointed this out to a guide, and he'd never even noticed them before. He's like, wow, I never saw those. And I said, yeah, they got them in Peru and Bolivia and stuff too. And he's like, oh, really? See, look at these. This is also Vietnam. These are the Cam people. And in fact, the Cam are very mysterious people. And Cam is the ancient word for Egypt. Even today in Arabic, the Arabs call Egypt Kamet, Kamet. And so in ancient Egyptian and stuff, their land was called Kam. So here now, once again, we're seeing this strange keystone cuts. Again, molten metals would have had to be poured into this. These blocks are also finely articulated and cut. They're granite and basalt. Once again, we're looking at apparently power tools used to cut these megalithic blocks of stone. This is what Mison looks like today. The Kam people, their main headquarters was this island off of Vietnam called Kam, and you can go there. But Mison itself was actually on the mainland. The people of Kam looked they were a combination of Egyptians and Asians, sort of the Chinese. Some of them looked very much like Africans, and they had like the Olmecs or something like that. They looked like they had curly hair. They suppose, even though they're in Southeast Asia, they seem to have some connections to ancient Egypt. This is actually from Mison and Cam people. This is a picture, a statue of Shiva, and he's got the third eye. So these guys were actually Hindus, and later they were Buddhists. This is also a Cam statue, and it looks very Mayan, in fact. This is also a Cam statue. He's got the beard, the mustache. He's got his rosaries. He's doing his yoga meditation, meditation kind of things. Also very finely made statues and things. Right nearby is Angkor Wat, the famous place in Cambodia. And Japanese archaeologists have found the clamps there too. The same keystone cuts, the same kind of clamps are there at Angkor Wat. They also have at Angkor Wat these same monolithic doors. Doors that are cut out of one solid piece of granite or sandstone. The moving of megaliths today, this is from the island of Nias off Sumatra in Indonesia. Giant blocks of granite here. Here they're actually moving probably some old megalith, but this is, even today, people are trying to manhandle and move some giant block around. It's not easy. As you go to Indonesia and to this remote island of Sulawesi, which is north of Java, the Dutch found that in the middle of this island, in a remote valley called the Bada Valley, these strange statues. And they're megalithic. This is Sulawesi. Bada Valley's up in here. It's only been the last 10 years that there has been a muddy Jeep road, and you need a four-wheel drive to drive up into this valley. It's high up in the mountains. It's where they think that rice was originally made. This is what Bada Valley looks like when you can finally get up there. It's an ancient place. There's all of these strange stone statues there. It's thought that the archaeologists have no explanation for it. They don't know who built it. They believe that they're 6,000 or more years old. And they're very finely made. They look a little bit like Easter Island heads and things, and giant. They're huge in many cases. And they have this strange look to them with the eyes. They also seem to be machined, that they've been cut and very precisely made with what appears to be power tools. What you also find there in the Bada Valley are these megalithic stone jars. Many of them are broken, but they're a big piece of granite that's been lathed and then cut on the inside, making what would be some kind of huge granite cauldron or something. They too appear to be machined by power tools and things. And what their purpose was, and again, who built them and stuff, archaeologists have no idea. And this is extremely remote, high area of Sulawesi. And how people got there in ancient times is a mystery, too. Well, going back now to Puma Punku. Puma Punku, archaeologists, with all of the H blocks and all of the finely cut blocks, they've tried to put it together, what it looked like. What was this structure? What did it look like before it was destroyed? So they have this idea, these H blocks are all uniformly made, they would fit together like Lego, they would build these huge walls with them. This is what architects, as they studied the blocks that are there at Tiwanaku, these are some of the designs they came up with. This is what this building looked like. It really was finely made, and I mean, it was some incredible structure and building that was awesome to see when it was completed. This is just a drawing that's at the museum there at Tiwanaku, and here we have the local Aymara Indians in their simple tunics. They've got their perfectly fitted, articulated blocks. They've got them there, and they've made the keystone cuts. Now they're pouring the liquid metals into it to create the clamps. Something like this had to go on, although they're making it look very primitive in this drawing. This is the kind of articulation that you have with these H-stone blocks. I mean, the way that they're cut and articulated, and each the same, it's like some giant airship landed there, and it was a stone factory. It began with cutting heads and saws. It just would take a block of granite, cut it up into an H block, spew it out, and then the builders would stack these up and put them together. Just to the west of Tiwanaku is this pyramid, which so far Bolivian archaeologists don't recognize this yet because it's being looted basically by a village. And so it is a giant pyramid. And you can see it from Tiwanaku. I tried to go there a couple of times, but the people in the village won't let you go there. They basically stop you. But at this pyramid, in this area, a couple of very unusual objects have been found. One is the Potiki monolith, which was a statue. They call it a monolith. It's broken in a couple of places, and it actually has writing on its side. Now, it's said that in South America that they never knew writing, and that there is no writing, and the Incas didn't know writing either. But they found on the Potiki monolith is a kind of Sumerian writing. I mean, not just a kind, but Sumerian hieroglyphs. And what's also found there, and both of these today are in the Precious Metals Museum in La Paz, Bolivia, and this is a government museum. The Potiki monolith is not on display, although they brought it out for the Ancient Alien crew, and it was in a vault. We were able to see it. But what is on display is this, and it's called the Fuente Magna Bowl. And you can see this today in the museum. It was found near Tiwanaku, and what it has is Sumerian cuneiform writing on it, on one side, and on the other side has Sumerian hieroglyphs. The Sumerians had several different alphabets. Early on, they used hieroglyphs like the Egyptians and Hittites. Later, they moved into cuneiform. This kind of a writing, cuneiform writing, is basically from 3000 BC. These are some of the hieroglyphs there that are on the Fuente Magna Bowl. This is Sumerian writing. It's absolutely a fact. And here's the cuneiform writing. This archaeological artifact today in the Precious Metals Museum in La Paz, this is a time bomb for archaeology. I mean, this cannot be there. It's a Sumerian artifact that's 5,000 years old, but it's in Bolivia. To mainstream archaeologists, I mean, this turns history of the Americas and the history of the world completely on its head. Every history professor in the world would have to say, this cannot be. But it's there. And in fact, this guy, he's the discoverer of the Fuente Magna Bowl, what they call it, with Sumerian writing on it. And in fact, what the Bolivian government did to gain possession of the bowl, now in the museum, is they traded him a house, you know. And I said, here, we'll give you this house. Give us that bowl that you're keeping. He said, yeah, good deal. So hieroglyphic writing like that was also used by the Hittites. By the way, the Hittites had these vitrified cities and things like that. And the kind of writing there, this is also some cuneiform. Here we go. This is what some of the guys look like at Tiwanaku, at the pottery. He's also wearing a turban. He has like a plug in his chin there, and he looks very much like an Aymara Indian that live around Lake Titicaca. But these are other guys from Tiwanaku too. The guy at the bottom looks very oriental, like he's some Chinese guy. And the guy there at the top has a thick beard and a mustache. So the kind of faces that you see there are very strange. I mean, people literally from all over the world, apparently. These are some of the skulls, and we'll now run quickly through some of the cone heads, the elongated craniums there. This is at Tiwanaku. Many of them also, the skulls and skeletons they found have these elongated heads. This is not on display now at Tiwanaku. They've actually taken this off display. I was just there a few weeks ago, and this thing that you're looking at is all covered up, so the tourists can't see it now. But you'll see some of the unusual heads here, but we'll see some even more unusual ones. Some of the best really elongated heads come from this area called Paracas and Ica. It's a desert area south of Lima, going towards Nazca. And it's Tiwanaku and Lake Titicaca is like directly east from this area. And as you go in there, you see trepan skulls, you see the elongated heads, you get guys like this. Some really extremely extended craniums where they have their skulls are like twice the size of a human being. And the areas are very much a desert area that preserves the skeletal material. It's super dry there. Many of the skulls came from a pyramid site called Chongos that's nearby. But when you see a lot of these skulls that come from this area, they are startling. And these guys really look like they are extraterrestrials or something like that. This is the pyramid of Chongos, where a lot of these skulls have been excavated there in the Paracas area. Here's some more of the kind of skulls. I mean, these guys are some pretty weird looking dudes. This one too, you have the whole thing where your head, the plates in your head start to fuse. When you're a small child, your plates in your head haven't completely fused yet. But this skull here, which is also from the Paracas area, the fusion of his head and the plates in his skull are very unusual. This is not the normal kind of plates that people have in their heads when they're fused together. So this may actually be an alien skull, this kind of guy. They have found small babies, mummies and things like that, also with these large heads and things like that. We know that people did do some cranial deformation, that's definitely known. This is another skull that's at the Gold Museum in Lima. He's been trepanned, and basically a big hole has been cut in his head, and a gold plate was put in there. So this guy's literally had some kind of brain surgery, and then a gold plate was put in his head thousands of years ago, and he lived, and the cranium grew over the gold plate and stuff like that. Some of the people there too have red hair and brown hair, something we wouldn't really expect to see in South America. This is the area too that has the candlestick of the Andes, which you can see either from the air or also from boats coming by sea. The famous Nazca Plain is just a little bit further south from here. In order to really see the figures on the Nazca Plain, you need to get into an airplane, and they have an airstrip there, and that's what tourists do. You get into like a Cessna plane, and you go flying over the Nazca Plain, and their giant figures are etched into the plane, all of these trapezoids, runway-type figures, and it really can only be seen from the air. And so in some way, it is some airport. They're trying to signal people like cargo cults, land here or something like that. We just don't know. This cranial deformation was done all over the world. This is an Olmec skull that would be from Mexico City. The Olmec area is an area that is around, it's all over Mexico, in fact. These are some Olmec figures from Comacalco, which is an area along the Gulf Coast near La Venta, which was thought to be the strange Olmec capital. These are unusual looking guys. And in fact, the museum at Comacalco, I was just there in November, they've removed these figurines from the museum. They're just too weird. They don't want people looking at this, thinking they're aliens or something. This is also a skull. This is from the museum in Merida in the Yucatan. He's a pumpkin head kind of guy with his widened skull. There are ways of doing deformation like this. We know that people in the past, they were doing this. Why there was this cranial deformation, we don't know. This had to do with the aristocrats and the elite. They were doing something that they were either trying to imitate, like extraterrestrials or something, or they're imitating these Anunnaki elite, people who had these elongated heads. The Olmecs themselves weren't really discovered as a civilization until 1940. And in 1940, what happened was Mexican archaeologists brought people from all over the world to Mexico City, and then they presented all this evidence of the Olmecs, saying, yeah, the Olmecs, this is a whole new civilization. They're pre-Mayan. And in fact, almost everything we have that we attribute to the Mayans didn't come from the Mayans at all. It really came from the proto-Mayans, which we call today the Olmecs. And the Olmecs were all over the place. They were in El Salvador. They were in Guatemala. They were on the Pacific coast. They were on the Atlantic coast. Some of the heads, what they call the colossal heads, they weigh 20 tons. They're carved out of basalt. They are very finely made. They're absolutely megalithic. They look very much like Africans, and also like the Khmer people of Vietnam. They're wearing these strange helmets. They have the wide nose and thick lips. And yet, again, the mainstream archaeologists say, oh no, these are American Indians. And they walked, from the Bering Strait, from Siberia, they just walked down there, and this is what they're saying. They would just find them. This is the oil area of Mexico, too, on the Atlantic coast in the Gulf. And literally, what would happen is, bulldozers and things would just find these things where they were buried in these swamps. At La Venta, too, they found that it had this very sophisticated water system and drainage system that went through it. I mean, these people were excellent builders and building things that were pretty amazing. And what you have, again, is that the Olmecs are this narrow area here. They're both on the Pacific and they're on the Atlantic. So some transoceanic or transcontinental, they could be coming across the Atlantic, they'd be coming across the Pacific, and that's the area that they controlled, even around Mexico City, Monte Alban. This is also an Olmec guy too, and he looks very Egyptian, and he's wearing this false beard, just like Egyptian pharaohs and stuff like that wore. I mean, as you see, the Olmec guys, this is also the area of the rubber ball, where we get the ball game that was played also here in northern Arizona and up into Utah. The rubber balls were found, these guys. This is a very strange colossal head of the Olmecs, and these pock marks here are very odd. It's like, and archaeologists can't figure it out. It's like someone took some power tool and just started defacing it, dishing it out, trying to actually deface this statue. But this could really only be done with some kind of power tool, not again, bashing it out, because it's this dish-shaping pockmarks that are on it. And in fact, other monuments have this too, what apparently are these ancient marks of power tools. Just people playing with them, like, I'll just start defacing this statue or something. This was also at Comacalco, what all these guys look like here. They've taken this off display too, because you look at all these different guys and you're like, whoa, you know, who are these weirdos? You know, and yeah, and at the museums, they've just decided that this is not something that, okay, we don't want tourists to see this anymore. At Mexico City, this is a famous jade celt thing. You see these guys, they're also these cone heads with these elongated heads. They're Olmecs. They have oriental type eyes. This is jade, and as a matter of fact, a Shang Chinese expert came from Beijing to look at these guys, and there's a type of writing, I go on to this in my book on the Olmecs, on these jade celts, these sort of things here, and there's inscriptions there, and it's apparently very ancient Chinese writing. This is what they claim. So you have these other cone heads. They were actually all over the world. This is Meritaten. She was one of the daughters of Akhenaten and Nefertiti. Their brother was Tutankhamun. She's a cone head too. So you have these people. You have the Egyptians. Tutankhamun. You don't really, when you hear stories about him, when he's in the news a lot, you never hear that he's a cone head, but he was. He's had this elongated skull too, just like these guys in South America and the Olmecs and stuff. And the Anunnaki. This is from ancient Sumeria. These are your Anunnaki figurines. They have these elongated skulls. They have the weird eyes, what they call the coffee bean eyes. We have figurines. We do not have the skeletal material coming from ancient Sumeria, these guys. They're not preserved. They've been destroyed. And it's one of the things why South America is so important, is that because of the extremely dry conditions there, we're able to preserve like the skulls and things. This guy is a Chinese Taoist immortal. He's a conehead too. And a pretty extreme one too. So you'd have, apparently in China, these guys are running around too with these elongated skulls and stuff. You have these guys, they have what they're called the pumpkin heads or the M skulls. You find this too with the Olmecs, where they had this deep cleft in their skulls, very strange. The Chinook Indians up around Seattle, they had these elongated skulls. That the largest lake west of the Mississippi is Flathead Lake in Montana. I went to high school and college right around there. And it's called Flathead Lake because the Flathead Indians lived there, and the Flathead Indians had flat heads. In the Congo, you also have people who are doing this skeletal deformation, the cranial deformation, the elongated heads. This was taken in like 1920 by a Dutch anthropologist. This is this baby. Yeah, he's going through cranial deformation, and his skull is wrapped. This is what it would look like. So, I mean, this is actually a normal, baby whose head is being wrapped. It would be a similar thing to foot binding that the Chinese did to women up until about 100 years ago, trying to do purposeful type deformations on people. But why would they be doing that? And they're doing it all over the world, in Egypt, in South America, in Africa, in China, the Koreans too. Some of these conehead guys are found in Korea. They're all over the world. They're also on the Pacific island of Vanuatu as well. Another strange thing is around the world is these stone balls, and I got really interested in this. Went to Costa Rica. You have these granite balls. Some of them are weighing many tons. Some of them are nearly as big as a car. You'll find them. They were found in the jungle area of the southwestern Costa Rica. We know they're man-made, but we don't know who made them, why. They're coming from this area down here, near to Panama, in fact. It's the southwest corner of Costa Rica. Some were found on an island here. They get found in jungle areas up in the mountains. They're just found out in the jungle. It's as if some tidal wave, cataclysm, it just washed these giant man-made granite balls up into the jungle where people find them. Some granite balls are discovered actually in tombs, burials there. They don't know why. And I had a guy send me this, and it was about the building of the Santa Monica Railway in about 1910. And they used a steam shovel to go out, and they were digging out a hill, and what did they find? A whole bunch of stone balls. Franz Josef Land in the Russian Arctic, And there are stone balls there, just washed up in this Arctic island. Again, these appear to be man-made balls, but an archaeologist cannot explain it. They don't know why they're here, who built them. It's time for a Hall's mentholyptus break. So geologists and archaeologists are saying, all right, these stone balls, well, they have to be natural somehow, but we can't really explain it, what they're here. And what's so strange is that they don't know why. I mean, why? I mean, we know that some of these stone balls are man-made. They absolutely are. Some, though, may be natural, although how they're made is a mystery. In Bosnia, there are stone balls. Just like this, we were in Bosnia a couple of years. There's a bunch of stone balls all over Bosnia, and we found it was a big deal. A lot of them that we went to visit were in this creek that had been washed down, and you see these stone balls, and there they are. You know, they're not the size of a car. The ones in Costa Rica and Franz Josef Land, they're very big. These ones are big. They weigh about 1,000 pounds or something like that. There's a place in Mexico too that has these stone balls, Piedras Bola, where you come along and there's a bunch of stone balls there. These they try to explain as natural, that there's some kind of volcanic bombs blown out of some volcano, and you know, they get round as they fly through the air and then they land, you know. So yeah, I became fascinated by this whole round ball, stone ball thing, because it's utterly baffling. I mean, no one can figure out like why they're doing this, what it's about, why the big stone balls. Did they have something to do with moving the giant megaliths and things like that? They're in Italy. These are some stone balls that are in various areas of northern Italy, like here. Here we go. I mean, they're big in many cases. This is Dubrovnik in Croatia. And here's a bunch of small stone balls here. I mean, maybe they could have been used as cannonballs or catapults, you know, flinging them at the walls or something. We just don't know, you know, what they're doing. Some of them they're really big. I mean, although these are quite small ones. And then in China, there's this town in China, and this is southern China, near to Hong Kong, in fact. And yeah, it's got all these stone balls there too. Yeah, they don't know what they're doing there. These things are thousands of years old too. These are some of the ones in China. So I just became really interested. At Malta, there are also stone balls there. These are some of the ones here in Malta. They're smaller. And now get this. You go to Easter Island, out in the middle of the South Pacific, one of the remotest islands in the world, and they've got stone balls there too. This is one in the museum. That's a small one. And in fact, on Easter Island, they say that this stone ball that's there, they call this ball the navel of the world. On Easter Island, they say this is the most important thing on the whole island. When you go to Easter Island too, you're going to see this quarry that's here, the giant statues that are there. They're buried up to their necks. Archaeologists are saying that they're fairly recent. The statues were all around the island, according to the islanders. When they put the statues there, this power came out of their eyes. But at the quarry, they're just lying around. They're buried. These things are gigantically huge. They quarried them, but then they never went very far. And now, what's strange is that, yeah, they're buried under 30 feet, maybe, of dirt. Some of them are sticking out at angles and stuff. This was actually an excavation done in like 1956 by Thor Heyerdahl. But you see how big these statues are, and why would they be buried like this? And again, archaeologists are saying, oh, they're not very old. They're just, you know, they're just made like 100 years or 200 years before, you know, the Europeans got there. Yeah, well, why are they buried in 30 feet of soil? They don't explain that. As you go up into the crater there, you walk up these stairs, then there's a lake. There are more statues inside the crater. This is the Tortora reed lake, the same kind of reeds that are growing at Lake Titicaca. But once again, the mainstream archaeologists are saying, oh, there's no connection between Easter Island and South America. You know, how could there be? You have all of these statues again. It's a natural amphitheater. They're kind of looking down at this lake. It's almost like it would be like a kind of ancient theater. But with these all the different statues. You've got these, this shows you how big some of the statues are. I mean, some of them are gigantically huge. And why, again, why would the Easter Islanders want to even do this? The explanation, mainstream scientists are just saying, oh, well, they're just, they were bored. You know, they're got on this, they're like marooned on this little island. They don't have anything else to do. You know, they're just going to. By the way, the Easter Island statues, they're cone heads as well. So here you go. This is what they say, that the statues had these eyes in them inlaid, and a power came out of the eyes that was protecting the island. That's what the Easter Islanders say. One of the statues that's there is a very strange statue like this. This is in the museum there, supposedly a woman. This is a very, very strange, unique statue. You've got to wonder who she is. She apparently has an elongated head. This is a granite statue. And one of the things, this is a new thing on Easter Island, but in 1960, they just put this in the museum, that they found this strange head. And it's like some alien head. It doesn't look like the other statues that are there. And in fact, this was not in the museum at Easter Island until just a few years ago. What you also find at Easter Island are walls like in Peru, perfectly cut. Granite walls, big lichen patches. You once again see the perfectly fitted blocks. This is a place called Vinapu. You see how they've notched these blocks again and put it together. This is the kind of fitting that we were looking at in Cuzco, also in Egypt and other areas. And there's one also unique statue that was discovered by Thor Heyerdahl on Easter Island. And this is a guy who's kneeling on the ground. He's in what's called the Quizuo position. He's on his hands and knees, and he puts his hands on his knees, and his head is forward. It's a kind of a sublimation type of figure, and it's an unusual way of presenting yourself. It's also found around the world. It's called Quizuo. So this is a Shang Chinese Quizuo statue. You're down, you have your hands on your knees. We have the Egyptians had statues like this too. This is the Quizuo posture. This is another Shang Chinese guy. He's got a mohawk haircut. And at Tiwanaku, there were also statues found there that are, they're wearing the turbans, and they're in the Quizuo position. And it's an unusual thing. The Olmecs in Mexico also did this, the Quizuo position. They're like this. And at Harappa in ancient India, they're also doing this. Now on Easter Island, there's a kind of a script. They had their own writing called Rongo writing. And it was done in the Bostafidan pattern as the ox plow, one row read left to right, then right to left. Doric Greek was written like that, Hittite writing, and the Rongo tablets on Easter Island. Mainstream archaeologists are saying, yeah, these islanders, yeah, they invented their own writing system too, on this tiny island. Here's Hittite writing, also in hieroglyphs. It was also read in the same way, as the ox plow, left to right to left. So, Candi Suka in Indonesia, this is also in Java. As we look around, we're now getting to Asia. This is very much like a Mayan pyramid, but it's in Polynesia. So here we go, the Polynesian Triangle, Easter Island, possible contact with Peru, and then the Philippines. And what happens to, particularly once you get to Southeast Asia, you have literally 1 billion Hindus and Buddhists, and they're all familiar with vimanas. That people had vimanas, they had this ancient flight. There's the famous Indian epics read like wild as science fiction. Rama has his vimana, he's flying through the air. In order to have also flight, ancient flight, you need metals, you need electricity. We know that they had electricity, we know that they had complicated machines like this, the Antikythera device, which was found in a shipwreck on the island of Antikythera in 1900 by divers. It was this complicated cogged machine with wheels. It was some kind of a computer. It wasn't until 1950 that American scientists said, boy, we never imagined that they had anything like this in ancient times. It was like finding a jet plane in the tomb of King Tut. That's what they said. And in fact, that's what they started finding in Egypt was things that electrical devices like this. This is at the Temple of Dendera in Abydos. And here you have these cables are coming out of the back of this thing. It looks like you have jed pillars, you have this like serpentine filament or something that's inside. It looks like some kind of projection tube or electrical device. Mainstream archaeologists have to explain this too. And the way they explain it is they say, oh, this is a lotus flower. That's the aroma of the flower. I mean, they have to explain this because it can't be an electrical device. So it's a flower with a nice smell. That's what they say. All right, here's also at Abydos, which is nearby Dendera, and you have the so-called helicopter up here. You've got the jet plane that's right over there. Egyptologists have to explain this too, and I've talked to them. Their explanation is that with some of these, that they're two hieroglyphs superimposed on each other. And so it creates another picture. But the jet plane one here, they cannot explain that. And I've been told by Egyptologists that, yeah, they don't have any explanation for some of these things. The idea, too, that okay, people had electrical devices. Did they have heavy machinery like we have today? This was a gold pendant that was found in Panama. It has a stone in the middle. It's today in a museum in Panama. It's a gold object. Gold is indestructible. All gold from ancient times still exists today. But Ivan T. Sanderson, people looked at this object and what they called it a zoomorphic pendant. And it's kind of like a monster. It has a skid plate. What they decided that it really was a depiction of like a backhoe, some kind of heavy machinery, like a backhoe built by Caterpillar or something like that, and that it was a blade, but they've turned it into like a monster, but it's really, you know, a depiction of a machine. Here you go. We have the gold airplanes that are today in the Gold Museum in Bogota. They look exactly like airplanes, like a delta-winged plane. They try to say, yeah, this is also some kind of zoomorphic figurine. It's supposed to be like a flying fish or something like that. They would even put it into like a, you know, V-formation squadron of like delta-wing fighting jets and stuff like that. So they found also a winged model of what seemed to be a glider or something. Birds do not have tails like this. And now you have the other kind of pictures, like from the Dasani Monastery, where some guy's actually, you know, flying in some kind of spaceship or something like that, an aircraft. This is all what they call in the Sanskrit vimanas. The ancient Chinese had stories. This is your Eric von Daniken's Chariots of the Gods. The Kebra Nagast is an Ethiopian text about King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba, written in Amharic. It's an ancient text, it's well known. And within that text, they talk about King Solomon having an airship and flying from Jerusalem to Addis Ababa. And of course, she's there listening to her radio until he gets there. You've got these guys too. These are some Sumerian and Assyrian cylinder seals. You've got your winged disc, and three guys are flying in it. Okay. Here at Mohenjo-Daro, you've got people were just lying dead in the streets, like the ancient Indian epics had said. And the whole idea that they're flying, that he flew from Rama flew from Ayodhya down to Sri Lanka, and they call this Rama's Bridge. They've taken satellite photos. This is like a bridge underwater, like a road, like Key West. They found it. Well, in the Ramayana, in these epics, they keep talking about vimanas all the time, but then they found a book at the Royal Baroda Library in 1908 all about vimanas and the machines, and it said there were 4 types of vimana. There was a circular vimana. They had some that were like tubular airships. Some had wings. There were 4 times they said that Mercury was used in these vimanas. Mercury was a messenger god. He could fly through the air. The Vimanika Shastra specifically talked about Mercury as part of it. Strange book called Dweller on Two Planets that first mentions Mount Shasta and all the strange things around it. They talked about also these airships called Valexi that moved through the skies, and that was a book published in the 1800s. This was one of the first UFO photos taken in the late 1890s in New Hampshire. It shows apparently some kind of airship. And now to Nikola Tesla, probably the greatest scientist who ever lived. inventor. He's the inventor of three-phase currents, motors. Today, it's his inventions that are lighting this convention. Guglielmo Marconi was his student. He's the unified field. I'm running out of time, so I've got to move through this quickly with Tesla's death ray. But Tesla had this whole idea of broadcasting power through the atmosphere. He tried to build these towers in the 1920s. Just like radio or TV could be broadcasted and you would pick it up, Tesla wanted to broadcast electricity through the air. And his airships, his wingless anti-gravity airships, would just pick up power from his towers. These anti-gravity ships, this is the 1920s. They'll be, they're flying around. They don't have wings or anything. They're not airfoils. They're like UFOs. They're taking power from his towers. And then a group called the Lemurian Fellowship, which started in Milwaukee and Chicago, later moved to Los Angeles and San Diego. They maintained in Atlantis were these max towers, these crystal obelisk towers, and that they were like Tesla's system. And what they did was broadcast power into the atmosphere. And the ships and things like that would pick up the power from they're monolithic granite towers. Today we call them obelisks. Here's the unfinished obelisk in Egypt. An obelisk was said to be found in Ontario in Canada. It was right here in this area called Presqu'île Province Park. People used to supposedly go out. It was in the lake, and the very tip of it came out in the lake, and it's gone today. But then, get this, in the 1960s, the Blair cuspids were found by a British astronomer. His name is Blair, and they are basically what are obelisks on the moon. So here we have this Tesla power system that Tesla was trying to bring out in the 1920s. Then we have this supposedly Atlantean power system that was broadcasting power from obelisk as literally crystal towers. And now, apparently, we've got obelisks on the moon as well. And last but not least, supposedly on Phobos, one of the moons of Mars, there's also obelisks there, too. So, this is it, and I know I'm out of time, and thank you very much.
Listen. Do you hear? It's coming back.
Flying saucers have invaded our planet. Washington, London, Paris, Moscow are key targets. The whole world is under attack. Can it survive?
Exceptional skills as pilots and navigators, and over the next 7 months you will be trained to pilot a revolutionary new kind of aircraft, the electromagnetic flying machine.
As this footage illustrates, they can quite literally fly circles around any airplane. Then we hit the mother lode when we discovered Das Kugelberg's ball bearing factory. They're powered entirely by electromagnetic fields present in all space. There are no special effects or trick photography here, just modern aircraft at work.
Every one of you watching this screen, look out, because soon, very soon, the most horrifying monster menace ever conceived will be oozing into this theater.
Let's all go to the lobby.
Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat.
Real juicy, but it's really... Hey, how about a nice Hawaiian punch?
Sure.